a 7-1-year-old reversed blood work her doctor called irreversible. 5 things. Morning coffee. I'll show you exactly how. I'm Dr. Malik Jackson. 28 years in integrative and geriatric medicine. And this case still stops me. Her name was Dorothy, 68, retired teacher from Austin, Texas. She came in with chronic fatigue, steady muscle loss, and fasting glucose that had been climbing for 2 years straight. Her previous doctor looked at her chart and said, and I'm quoting directly, "This is just what getting older looks like." I've heard that phrase more times than I can count. Every time something in me pushes back hard, here's a number worth sitting with before we get into anything else. Without any intervention, adults over 65 lose an average of 1 to 2% of their muscle mass every single year. That doesn't sound like much. Do the math over a decade. That's not aging. That's a slow motion emergency that nobody scheduled an appointment to tell you about. Before we get into the 5 things, I need to tell you something up front. One of these 5 is something every standard nutrition guideline from the last 30 years told you was dangerous. The study that built that guideline was later found to have excluded data that contradicted its own conclusion. That study shaped American dietary advice for 3 decades. And one of the studies I'm going to walk you through today showed something that genuinely unsettled the research team running it. The improvements reversed within 4 weeks of stopping. That's not a supplement doing something cosmetic. That's biology responding in real time. I'll get to both of those. But first, here's how I think about what's actually happening inside an aging body. You know that subscription service you forgot to cancel? The one quietly charging your card every month for something you stopped using years ago? Unchecked cellular decline works exactly like that. Silent, automatic, and completely under the radar. But here's what most physicians still aren't telling their patients. You can renegotiate the terms, and most of the work happens before 9 a.m. Today, I'm walking you through 5 things I personally recommend to every patient over 60 who sits down across from me. Not a supplement catalog, not a trend, clinical research that the standard 15-minute appointment almost never has time to cover. Before we get into it, what's slowing you down most right now? Joints, focus, that wall of fatigue around 2 in the afternoon? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. All right, let's go. Everything I share today is educational, not a substitute for working with your own physician, especially if you're managing chronic conditions. Dorothy's case is exactly where we start, because the first thing I changed in her morning routine cost less than $3, and it was already in her kitchen. Most people reach for whatever's labeled cinnamon on the grocery store shelf without thinking twice. I did the same thing for years. The problem is there are 2 completely different plants being sold under that name, and only one of them does what the research actually shows. The kind most of us grew up with is cassia cinnamon, dark, strong, the standard spice rack version you see everywhere. The other is Ceylon cinnamon, lighter in color, softer in texture, sometimes called true cinnamon, and the difference between them is not minor. Cassia contains high levels of a compound called coumarin, fine in small amounts, but used daily over time, it puts real stress on your liver. That's not fringe science. Germany's Federal Institute for Risk Assessment has issued formal warnings against daily cassia consumption at cooking doses. Ceylon has almost none of it. But that's not even the main reason I recommend it. Think about rush hour on I-95 inches the middle of August. Every car is trying to get somewhere. The highway exists, the exits are right there, but nothing is moving. Not because the road is broken, because the on-ramps are completely backed up. That's what insulin resistance looks like inside an aging body. After 65, your cells steadily lose their sensitivity to insulin, the signal that tells them to absorb glucose for energy. The glucose is circulating, your cells need it desperately, but the signal keeps getting ignored. Your body has fuel, your cells are sitting in the dark. And all that circulating glucose starts causing damage just by being there. What Ceylon cinnamon does, specifically a compound in it called cinnamaldehyde, is reopen those on-ramps. It sensitizes your insulin receptors, gets the signal through again. A clinical trial from UC Davis followed 69 adults between 60 and 75 for 16 weeks. Half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon daily. The results? A 29% reduction in fasting blood glucose. Significant drop in LDL cholesterol compared to placebo. 29%. That's a number a cardiologist notices. And there's a second layer here that almost never gets discussed. Researchers at the Linus Pauling Institute identified cinnamaldehyde inhibiting a protein called HIF-1 alpha, a protein that developing cancer cells depend on to build new blood vessel networks. I want to be precise, this is early-stage chemopreventive research. Not treatment, not a cure. I'm not suggesting that, but the field is serious and cinnamon keeps showing up in it. For Dorothy, after 8 weeks, her fasting glucose had dropped 22 points. Her blood work was moving in a direction her last doctor had told her was impossible. Here's the practical side. 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon per day, stirred into your coffee grounds before brewing. The fat in your coffee, whether that's a splash of cream or a 1/2 teaspoon of coconut oil, increases absorption of the fat-soluble compounds by up to 60%. Add a small handful of walnuts alongside your morning cup if you can. The omega-3s work directly with cinnamon to amplify the effect on insulin sensitivity. Ceylon is lighter, almost tan, and has a softer, papery texture. Cassia is darker brown and usually smells stronger. Check the label. Most health food stores carry Ceylon specifically. Dorothy's blood sugar started improving. But what happened to her joints over the next few weeks that genuinely surprised both of us? And that brings me to that muscle loss number I mentioned at the start. 1 to 2% per year. Gone. Without a fight. Here's what nobody tells you about where that loss actually begins. When's the last time you thought about what's actually holding your body together? Not your muscles, not your bones, the connective material between all of it. Most people don't think about it at all until something starts to fail. Think about the grout between bathroom tiles. When everything's intact, you don't notice it. The wall looks solid, the whole thing looks fine. But once the grout starts crumbling, starts pulling away from the edges, the tiles begin to shift. Nothing breaks all at once. Everything just starts moving a little wrong. That's collagen, and after 70, your body produces roughly 35% less of it than it did when you were in your 30s. I had a patient named Frank, 72 years old, retired construction worker from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Man had been building things with his hands for 4 decades. He came to me because he'd had to stop woodworking, his only real hobby in retirement, because the joint pain had gotten bad enough to keep him awake at night. When I mentioned collagen, he actually laughed. Said it sounded like something his daughter put in her face serum. I told him to give it 8 weeks and we'd look at the numbers. Here's what most people misunderstand about collagen, and this includes physicians who should know better. It is not a beauty supplement, it is structural material. It holds together your joints, your arterial walls, your gut lining, your muscle tissue. When that scaffolding deteriorates, you don't just get wrinkles. You get the kind of chronic, low-level inflammation that slows down your entire repair process from the inside out. Think of it like a clogged intake valve in an engine. The fuel is there, the parts are functional, but the obstruction upstream means nothing. Downstream gets what it needs. A randomized controlled trial in the British Journal of Nutrition followed 53 men and women between 65 and 80. They supplemented with 15 grams of hydrolyzed collagen daily alongside a light resistance program. 12 weeks. The result? 4.2 pounds of lean muscle mass gained. Now hold that number next to the one I gave you earlier. 1 to 2% of muscle loss per year without intervention. 4.2 pounds gained in 12 weeks with collagen and a light resistance program. That is not a supplement, that is a direction change. That is the difference between getting up from a chair without thinking about it and calculating how much energy it's going to take. But here's the timing mistake I see constantly, even from people who are already using collagen. Most people take it at night or randomly throughout the day. Research from the University of Freiburg found that consuming collagen peptides within 30 minutes of your morning coffee, paired with vitamin C, increases bioavailability by nearly 40%. Why vitamin C? Because it's the essential cofactor your body uses to actually weave collagen fibers together. Without it, the peptides don't absorb properly. The fix is simple. 1 scoop, 10 to 15 grams of hydrolyzed collagen stirred into your morning coffee. It dissolves completely. No flavor. Add a squeeze of lemon juice or take a vitamin C supplement. If you're already doing Ceylon cinnamon, those two together create a compounding effect on metabolic function that goes beyond what either one does separately. Frank was back in his workshop 6 weeks later. Not pain-free, I want to be honest about that, but functional. Working 3 mornings a week on a cabinet he'd shelved for 2 years. He said at his follow-up, "I thought that part of my life was just over." Before we move to number 3, I want to make sure you're tracking what we're actually building here. This isn't a list of supplements. Every one of these connects at the cellular level to what came before it. And the next one is where the conversation gets genuinely extraordinary. Remember that study I mentioned at the start, the one where improvements reversed within 4 weeks of stopping? This is it. In a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial out of Tohoku University in Japan, adults over 50 showed significant improvements in cognitive function scores after just 8 weeks. That part you may have heard before. Here's what most people haven't heard. 4 weeks after they stopped taking it, the improvements reversed. Measurably, predictably, within a month. That does not happen with a placebo. A placebo effect does not reverse on a timed schedule when you remove the treatment. What that tells us is that lion's mane is not masking symptoms, it is actively stimulating the biological process that was producing those improvements, which means it needs to be consistent to keep working. I had a patient named Gloria, 74 years old, retired accountant from Phoenix, Arizona. She didn't come to me because of memory loss. She came in because of something she called word-finding trouble. She'd stop mid-sentence searching for a name. A word she'd used 1,000 times just wouldn't be there. Her daughter had started finishing her sentences for her. Gloria told me she wasn't scared of dementia specifically. She was scared of the feeling of her own mind becoming unreliable. That fear is more common than people talk about, and it deserves a real answer. Here's what's actually happening. Your brain has a natural repair and maintenance system. The central signal molecule in that system is called nerve growth factor NGF. Think of NGF as the autocorrect function on your phone. When it's working properly, you never think about it. It quietly corrects errors, maintains connections, keeps things sharp. But after 65, NGF production drops significantly. The autocorrect starts failing. Things start misfiring in ways you feel but can't always name clearly. Lion's mane contains 2 compounds found nowhere else in the natural world, hericenones and erinacines. What makes them remarkable is their documented ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, an incredibly rare feat, and directly stimulate NGF production inside brain tissue itself. Not increasing a precursor somewhere in your bloodstream and hoping your brain picks it up, going directly to the source. Beyond cognition, beta-glucans in lion's mane have shown the ability to activate natural killer cells, your immune system's frontline defense, by up to 300% in laboratory studies. After 65, those immune cells get sluggish. They respond slower, they identify threats less accurately. Lion's mane appears to sharpen them back up. For your morning coffee, use a dual extract lion's mane powder. Different compounds require different extraction methods, some water-soluble, some require alcohol extraction. A product that only uses one method is leaving half the benefit on the table. Look for labels that specifically say hot water and alcohol extract. 1 to 2 grams per day is the dose range used in most clinical research. Mild, slightly earthy taste in coffee, you honestly won't notice it. Here's the synergy that makes this specific to your morning. Caffeine increases cerebral blood flow by approximately 14%. That means the NGF-stimulating compounds in lion's mane get delivered to brain tissue faster and more efficiently when you pair it with your morning coffee specifically. You were already doing something useful. You're just giving it better cargo now. Gloria's daughter called my office 3 months after she started. She said her mother had stopped letting her finish her sentences. That was the whole update. That was enough. Quick pause here. If any of this is hitting close to home joints, focus, energy, hit like so. I know you're still with me. Drop one word in the comments right now. Joints, energy, or focus. Which one is your biggest battle? I'll read through all of them. Now let's keep going. I need to say something up front about this one. For the first 15 years of my practice, I told patients to reduce their dietary fat intake. That was standard guidance at the time. I followed the research I was given, and I gave that advice in good faith. That advice was wrong. And I think patients who were harmed by it deserve to hear a physician say that directly, without hedging. This is the one I warned you about at the start. The dietary guidelines that called fat dangerous were built substantially on research that investigators later found had excluded countries whose data didn't fit the conclusion. That selective data shaped American nutrition policy for 30 years. It got into school lunches, it got into hospital dietary plans, it got into what your doctor told you at every checkup. 30 years of advice, built on incomplete data, and the people who paid for that mistake were the ones who trusted us. Here's what we now understand. After 70, something happens to the brain that most primary care appointments don't have time to explain. The brain begins losing its ability to efficiently use glucose as fuel. It's called cerebral glucose hypometabolism, one of the earliest detectable markers of cognitive aging. Here's how I explain it to patients. Your brain runs primarily on glucose, the same way a car runs on standard fuel. But after 70, the fuel injectors start getting dirty. The engine is still there, the fuel is still there, but the delivery system is compromised. MCT oil, medium-chain triglyceride oil, is like a bypass surgery for that fuel line. Unlike every other fat you consume, MCT oil bypasses your lymphatic system entirely. It goes straight to your liver and converts almost instantly into ketones. And ketones are an alternative fuel source your brain can use without needing the compromised glucose pathway at all. You're not fixing the clogged line, you're routing around it. A study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease followed 152 adults with mild to moderate cognitive impairment. Those consuming 20 grams of MCT oil daily showed a 7-point improvement on standard cognitive testing within 90 days. In people who already had measurable cognitive decline, in 90 days, I had a patient named Walter, 69 years old, retired Navy, San Diego, California. Walter was the kind of man who described everything in operational terms. He told me his mind felt like it was running under a wet tarp. Couldn't track a conversation, couldn't hold a train of thought the way he used to. His wife had started coming to appointments with him not because she was worried about his safety, but because she knew he'd come home and not remember what I said. I started him on MCT oil, 1 tablespoon in his morning coffee. I told him to start with 1 teaspoon the first week if he experienced any stomach sensitivity. 8 weeks later, Walter came in alone. His wife stayed home. He'd told her he could handle it himself. His words, "It's like someone finally turned the lights back on." Now, beyond cognitive function, there's a second mechanism that goes further than most people realize. Research from the Buck Institute for Research on Aging found that ketone metabolism activates a protein pathway called AMPK. Think of AMPK as the morning shift supervisor for your body's cellular maintenance crew. When it clocks in, it walks through every department checking what needs repair, what needs replacement, and one of the key things AMPK activates is the proliferation of mesenchymal stem cells, the cells responsible for regenerating muscle, bone, and connective tissue. In aging bodies, these cells don't retire completely, they just gradually stop showing up. MCT oil, by reliably generating ketones every morning, essentially keeps paging those cells back to work. Practical guidance. Start with 1 teaspoon and work up to 1 tablespoon over 2 weeks. Some people experience digestive discomfort if they jump to a full dose immediately. MCT oil is not the same as coconut oil. It's a specific refined extract, much more concentrated. The labels look similar, they're not the same product. One important safety note. If you have liver disease or you're on blood thinners, please check with your own physician before adding MCT oil. The liver processes it differently than regular fat. Combined with the cinnamon and collagen we've already covered, you're now creating what researchers have described as a compounding metabolic effect, each one amplifying the others. Walter called my office last month. He'd taken a solo road trip from San Diego up to Oregon. First time he'd done anything like that in 4 years. His wife called separately to thank me. I think about that call a lot. There's a reason certain cultures have been eating aged garlic for over 1,000 years. They didn't have clinical trials, but they had generations of careful observation. And eventually the science caught up and explained exactly what they had been doing right all along. Fresh garlic is genuinely powerful. The allicin in fresh garlic has real biological activity, but allicin is also unstable. It breaks down quickly after you cut it. Much of it never survives the digestive process. Aged black garlic is what happens when fresh garlic is held at carefully controlled temperature and humidity for 30 to 40 days. The harsh, unstable compounds convert through something called a Maillard reaction into forms that are more stable, more concentrated, and far more available to your body. Here's the simplest way I explain it. Fresh garlic is a fast food burger, quick hit, burns bright, doesn't last. Aged black garlic is the same ingredients, slow cooked for 12 hours, everything deepens. The structure changes. What you get at the end is something your body can actually work with. The specific compound that matters most is called S-allocysteine or SAC, nearly absent in fresh garlic, highly concentrated after the aging process. I had a patient named Nancy, 71 years old, retired store manager from Portland, Oregon. She'd been fighting elevated cholesterol and a weak immune system for years, catching every cold that came through the community, taking 4 to 6 weeks to recover from each one. When I suggested aged black garlic, she made a face, said she hated garlic, couldn't stand the smell. I told her to try 1 clove, just taste it first. She came back 2 weeks later mildly annoyed. Her exact words, "Why didn't you tell me it tastes like balsamic vinegar?" That's one of the stranger things about aged black garlic. The pungency is almost completely gone. It's soft, sweet, slightly molasses-like. Nothing like what you're imagining right now. Here's what the research found. A clinical study from the Korean Institute of Science and Technology followed 64 adults over 65 through 12 weeks of aged black garlic supplementation. LDL cholesterol dropped an average of 19%. Natural killer cell activity increased 56%. Fasting insulin levels improved 23%. TNF-alpha, one of the most destructive inflammatory markers in aging biology, decreased by 31%. All four, simultaneously, 12 weeks. No single prescription drug does all 4 of those things at once. I just described what a clove does. Let me put that in perspective one more time. A physician treating for cholesterol uses 1 drug, for immune function, another, for insulin sensitivity, another, for inflammation, another. I'm not saying that to attack conventional medicine. I am conventional medicine. I'm saying this compound is doing something we haven't figured out how to put in a prescription bottle yet. Now, the cancer prevention research, I want to be precise here, because this is easy to misrepresent and the stakes are too high to be sloppy. SAC has been studied for its effect on angiogenesis, the process by which developing tumors build new blood vessel networks to fuel their own growth. Research published in the journal Carcinogenesis identified that SAC suppresses a signaling molecule called VEG, the signal tumors use to request those new blood vessels. Think of VEGF as the building permit for a tumor's infrastructure. SAC appears to intervene in the permitting process. Without new blood supply, a developing tumor cannot grow beyond a very small size. This is chemopreventive biology. Early-stage research, not treatment, not a cure. Ongoing studies at Johns Hopkins and MD Anderson. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what the science is actually showing. Not because I want you to replace your oncologist with a clove of garlic. For practical use, 600 to 900 milligrams of aged black garlic extract in capsule form, that's the range used in most clinical studies. You can also eat 1 to 2 whole aged black garlic cloves directly. They're soft enough to eat like a grape. Either approach works. If you're already adding MCT oil, the fat content significantly improves absorption of SAC and the sulfur compounds in aged black garlic. These two work measurably better together. Nancy's LDL dropped 14 points in 10 weeks. She stopped catching every winter cold. She now keeps aged black garlic on her counter the same way she keeps her coffee beans. She still won't touch fresh garlic. Some things don't change. Let me bring this back around. 5 ingredients, 5 separate biological systems, and every single one backed by clinical research that the standard 15-minute appointment almost never has time to cover. Ceylon cinnamon reopens the pathway between your blood sugar and your cells. Hydrolyzed collagen rebuilds the structural material your joints and muscles depend on, timed right, absorbed properly. Lion's mane directly stimulates your brain's own repair signal. MCT oil gives your brain an alternative fuel source when the primary one starts becoming unreliable. Aged black garlic addresses cholesterol, immunity, insulin sensitivity, and inflammation simultaneously. Now, Dorothy. I told you about her at the start. 68. Austin. Retired teacher. The patient her previous doctor had essentially written off. She still drinks Folgers. She never changed that part. She just changed what goes into it. 18 months after her first appointment, her fasting glucose was in normal range for the first time in 3 years. Her CRP, the primary blood marker for systemic inflammation, had dropped by more than half. And last spring, she sent me a photo. She was standing at the front of a beginner yoga class at her community center, teaching it. Not because everything is perfect. She has mornings where her joints are stiff. Some days are harder than others, but she is in the room, still showing up. That is the whole goal. Here's what I want to leave you with. Your body is not finished with you. That is not a motivational phrase. That is a clinical observation from 28 years of watching people choose differently and watching their biology respond. Aging is not a one-way door. It is a negotiation. And you have far more leverage in that negotiation than anyone has ever taken the time to sit down and tell you. Please work with your own physician, especially if you're managing chronic conditions or taking medications. Individual results vary. Nothing here replaces personalized medical care. The most powerful thing you can do for your health isn't what you stop eating, it's what you start adding with intention. Every morning you make that cup of coffee anyway. The question is just what you do with the next 60 seconds after you pour it. If one thing in here landed for you, one ingredient you're going to try tomorrow morning, drop it in the comments. Just one. That's all I'm asking. And if you want to go deeper, the next video covers what I call the invisible deficiency, the one marker most standard blood panels skip that correlates more strongly with cognitive aging than almost anything else we test for. I'll see you there.